Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another exciting edition of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. And I'm your host, Ronald Bethea. And you know, if you join us on a regular basis, the slogan for this show, if there's power in numbers, then the Positive Change Purchasing Cooperative LLC captures that power for your financial benefit. The Positive Change Purchasing Cooperative LLC serves as an economic blueprint for renewable energy companies, both large and small, to increase market share for African and African American renewable energy companies to address the high energy costs at our historically Black colleges and universities, to utilize Black-owned farmlands and HBCU campuses to develop capacity and initiatives for renewable energy projects to bring down the underemployment of young African American men and women locally, nationally, and throughout the diaspora. Also, to educate the African and African American community about the economic impacts of climate change and the need for environmental education through Black Talk radio programs such as Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. This show is also brought to you every weekend, ladies and gentlemen, by the Black Sports Legends Foundation BSLF HBCU Radio Talk Show Initiative. And you can get more information on that initiative by logging on to our website at positivechangepc.com. That's positivechangepc.com. You can also please remember to click on our GoFundMe link, and you'll be able to get more information on the HBCU Solar Radio Talk Show Initiative, which you're listening to over the online digital podcast radio TV network over our YouTube channel. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't have a scheduled guest today, but we have a very, very exciting subject matter that we're going to be discussing with you today here on the platform of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. And the question becomes, why is your energy bills going up? And why is there is an attack on the solar and wind industry in this country as we speak? Ladies and gentlemen, we will be unpacking that information for you over the next 60 minutes here on the platform of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. We'll also, ladies and gentlemen, be looking at a very, very interesting article which was authored by Charles Harper. And the actual title of that particular article is Why is Your Energy Bills Going Up? Now, it's not your imagination, Mr. Harper said in an online news publication, which is published in Evergreen Action, an outstanding online blog that we often refer to for a lot of interesting articles. And I thought that this would be something that we need to be very, very cognizant of as we are around this Labor Day weekend. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, today's date is Wednesday, August 27, 2025, and we're all blessed to be alive here to be able to speak to you, my audience here over the platform of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. Now, in this very, very interesting article that was written by, as I indicated, Charles Harper and Medline Kumar, they pointed to some very, very interesting things. And this article was basically published back in April. As they've indicated that, as I've indicated, if you think your electricity bills are going up, it's not your imagination. The U.S. has been electrical bills have been rising And if you're feeling overwhelmed by it, you're not alone. A recent survey found over 50% of Americans reported feeling overwhelmed by their utility costs. But why are the bills going up, and what can we do about it? And how can we help you find other cheaper forms of energy help? Now, as we know, ladies and gentlemen, in unpacking that, we'll be able to answer the second phase of the issue. And in the second phase of the issue, everything always comes down to policy and regulations. So we're going to look at the impact that the regulatory organizations have on impacting your electricity bills. Most people are not aware of the impact that the regulatory entities have on their everyday existence as it relates to their energy bills. Now, as we begin to look at that industry, we first want to sort of, as they say, make it plain as to what we're talking about when we're talking about the regulatory entities in itself and what role that they do play in the marketplace. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to look at the definition of a ROTC. RTOs, they're referred to, not RTCs, but RTOs in the United States play a critical role in regulating electricity by managing the bulk electricity power systems across most of North America. They are independent membership-based nonprofit organizations that ensure reliability and the optimization of supply and demand bids for wholesale electricity power. RTOs manage 60% of the power supplied to load-serving entities and are reasonable for coordinating, controlling, and monitoring a multi-state electricity grid. They were established to promote economic efficiency, reliability, and non-discriminatory practices while reducing governmental oversight. RTOs are regulated by the Federal Regulatory Commission and monitored for compliance and accountability by the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. Now, we know the Federal Regulatory Commission, which was formerly headed by a dear associate and friend of mine, Mr. Willie Phillips, who was based here in Washington, D.C. He formerly headed the Public Service Commission for Washington, D.C., but he was tapped by President Biden to serve as the first African American to head the Federal Regulatory Commission here in Washington, D.C. And there was some very, very interesting things that took place under his watch. On January the 20th of 2025, he was replaced by a gentleman by the name of Mark Crispy, which he formerly headed the utility corporation of the state of Virginia, which he had a military background, and he was tapped by the 47th president to, in fact, Trump, to, in fact, replace Mr. Phillips at the Regulatory Commission. Now, in reading that definition as relates to dis discriminatory practices as it relates to the economics of these regulatory entities. Let's sort of take a deep dive into causes of higher energy power bills, and then we'll talk about the regulatory entities and the roles that they play in this. What causes higher power bills? Power bills include both the cost to produce electricity and the power plants and the cost of the grid infrastructure needed to get it to your home or business. Both have gone up right now. About 60% of the US electricity comes from fossil fuels, including gas and coal. Fossil fuel prices have increased over the last few years, particularly in response to the war in Ukraine and other geopolitical uncertainties, and they remain quite volatile. When the cost of fossil fuels needed to produce electricity goes up, it gets passed on to you in higher bills. The upkeep costs and grid of infrastructure has also increased. Hidden reasons for increase of climate change, which is of course primarily caused by the burning of fossil fuels, which more extreme weather events and wildfires, utility companies are paying more to repair and upgrade power lines. Some power lines have also sparked wildfires, including those in California, as utilities are paying more for risk insurance to protect themselves from future wildlife liabilities. Again, many of these costs are passed on to consumers through their energy bills. Demand for electricity is surging in the US, and that is the starting of to show up on energy bills as power hungry data centers get built around the country to enable the boom in artificial intelligence, crypto mining, and blockchain technology. Utilities also need to build new plants of infrastructure to supply data centers without ratepayers' protections. Communities get stuck footing the bills for big tech power needs. And we're going to weigh in on this, ladies and gentlemen, because that's very, very significant and very, very important. What about higher gas bills and gasoline prices? Global instability and controversial new tariffs are driving up gas and gasoline prices, impacting consumers and the border economy. Fossil fuels like natural gas and gasolines are both sold on the global market. So geopolitical uncertainty can affect their costs. We saw that with Russia's invasions of Ukraine when the global fuel prices spiked. The recent tariffs announced by the present administration have also increased the cost of fossil fuel gas and gasoline, much of which is imported from countries like Canada and Mexico. Tariffs on Canadian energy are expected to increase gasoline prices in the Midwest by up to 50% per gallon, while Americans who use electric heat pumps for heating electrical vehicles or transportation are less exposed to volatile fuel costs. Higher fuel costs also lead the higher prices for any goods and services that require energy to move to the marketplace. What can states do to lower the energy costs? That's what people want to know. They want solutions to their problems, ladies and gentlemen. And here on the platform of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America, We're going to attempt to unpack these issues and talk about some solutions. Not all energy bills are made equal. What you end up paying for each month in your electric bill largely depends on the decisions your state makes on whether or how it gets their energy, whether it is invested in energy efficiency buildings or how dramatically climate change has affected your part of the country. In other words, local policymakers, when understanding your energy costs, what do the states with the lowest prices have in common? According to a 2024 report by the nonpartisan think tank Energy Innovation, many of the places that have seen the lowest energy bills increases since 2010 are states that have built large amounts of clean energy. States like Iowa, Kansas, New Mexico, Oklahoma that have built the most cheap wind and solar have actually seen energy prices increase less than the overall for inflation. Which states have the highest energy reliant on gas for electricity and higher fuel costs? States have lots costs as it relates to the energy use and cost of their state. So, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, we are had a slight technical problem here in the studio, but we're back on track now, and we're going to be going back and drilling down on these issues of what states that are providing the higher versus lower costs. Now, when we begin to look at the issue around energy, and we want to talk about how people can lower their energy costs, how can states do more to lower energy bills? That's very important. Not all energy bills are made equal. What you end up with are paying for each month in your state, the electricity bills depends on the decisions the states make. Now, we've indicated that, and we were looking at a recent report according to the nonpartisan report put out by Energy Innovation going back to 2010 that states that have built large amounts of clean energy like Iowa, Kansas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma, they've built wind and solar cheaper, and the cost of energy in those states are cheaper. The states that are more dependent on fossil fuels have higher costs. Now, states that have more energy efficient buildings and efficient requirements usually see lower energy bills, even with higher prices. If you are using less electricity, then you will be less affected by the energy price spikes. And we know in the marketplace that nothing can compete with wind and solar. How do I lower my energy bills? Hint, cheap, clean energy. There are several lessons to be learned from the states that have kept prices down. The first lesson is that the building cheap, clean energy keeps bills down. Clean energy is cheaper than fossil fuels. Wind and solar are the two cheapest forms of electricity. States that utilities that build them out can also take advantage of a 30% federal tax credit. Well, that's very interesting, ladies and gentlemen, because this morning, early this morning, I was listening to a town hall meeting on C-SPAN with the Republican representative. I don't know whether he was a congressman. I think he's a congressman. And he was basically lying to his constituents that the reason why energy cost was going up in their state was because of the bill out of solar and wind and the 30% federal tax credit that anyone who puts a PV system is on their roof is entitled to. The problem with the 30% federal tax credit, ladies and gentlemen, is the fact of the matter is that came from the Biden-Harris administration under Executive Order 14006. And it was the first thing that the Biden-Harris administration did when he came to office. He signed that executive order 1409009 and 13985, which gave us the Invest in America agenda. The Biden and Harris administration was able to attract $133 billion in foreign investors' investment in renewable energy projects that went across the U.S. And out of the $133 billion, $109 billion went to red districts. Only $20 billion went to blue districts. Now, the clean energy eg2.com, you can go to my website and you can look under our news and events, and you'll be able to find the article that will give you a breakdown state by state on the number of projects that were to go into each state, number of jobs creation, and the amount of investment. The problem is when Trump came into office, the first thing he did was sign executive orders rescinding the tax investment tax credits for the Green New Deal across the board, for EV charging, for rooftop solar. The original sunset date for EVs was December 31st of 2032. It has been moved back, ladies and gentlemen, to September the 30th of 2025. There is still present a $7,500 investment tax credit for anyone purchasing a new electric vehicle, and anyone purchasing a used electric vehicle, there's a $4,000 tax credit. The problem is, will there be enough inventory of vehicles available in your marketplace? Some places there will, some places there won't be. Now, as we begin to drill down and look at the issue of higher costs and why your energy bills we must begin to look at those regulatory entities across the U.S. And we're going to specifically look at three particular regions of the country, which is going to be what we call the Mid-Atlantic region. And that is regulatory, the regulatory entity for that area is called the PJM. The PJM is composed of 13 states. Those states that are composed in that particular group, we're going to sort of give you an idea of what is going on as it relates to an up and coming conference that's going to be held, and the reason why it's being held, because of the impact of the constituents and the governors. There will be on September the 22nd a conference held in Philadelphia around this issue, and what can be done is what is going to be done about this as it relates to the issue of how the governors plan to deal with this. Now, online there is a article which you'll be able to find under our news and events tab, which is entitled PJM Bulletin August 2025. You can click on that article. When you click on that article, it will give you the information concerning the upcoming conferences. Now, the states and governors that are a part of the PJM starts with Delaware, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Maryland, Michigan, New Jersey, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, and West Virginia. And it's a multi-state technical conference that they will be hosting, and with our nation's capital, the District of Columbia. What is important to know about this, ladies and gentlemen, as it relates to the PJM, is that first, Governor Shapiro in December of 2023, in fact, did bring litigation against the PJM. And he brought that litigation against the PJM because he looked at the fact that the PJM has a base of 65 million customers across those 13 states in the District of Columbia. And for the state of Pennsylvania, he looked at his state being one of the top energy producing states of all 50 states in the U.S. Many people are not aware of the various resources that the state of Pennsylvania has. And he also threatened to take the state of Pennsylvania out of the PJM because the PJM has the worst record of all the regulatory entities because it has over 3,000 solar and wind and battery storage projects that have been completed, built out, but they can't get it permitted to uplink to the grid. Also, you have 1,000 members, voting members, which are part of the PJMs, the stakeholders. 99% of them are tied to the fossil fuel industry. And what they have is a clean energy, clear capacity of only 1% for solar and 3% for wind. And this goes into who votes on how much energy can be used in those market demographics, the price of that energy, cost of that energy, infrastructure cost of that energy, and that is passed directly to us as consumers. Well, let's look at what the wholesale auctions for the PJM did, and going back to the issue of the lawsuit that was brought by Governor Shapiro in December of 2023. I mentioned the name of Mr. Willie Phillips, who was then head of the Federal Regulatory Commission. At that time, he had oversight over this complaint through the Federal Regulatory Commission, and they ruled in favor of the states because the fossil fuel industry had filed petitions seeking an 800% rate hike for natural gas, which would have cost the 13 member states, which were also included in the lawsuit. Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania were the lead litigants in that seat, in that complaint, but it was joined by all 13 states, which I read those states, by their Office of the People's Counsel through their public service commissions, which are responsible for protecting the ratepayers in each state. And they all came in as complainants in this litigation, and under the leadership of Mr. Phillips, they won, which blocked a $21 billion rate hike, which would have hit ratepayers June 1st of 2025 across those 13 states and those 65 million customers. Since that has taken place, we know that elections have consequences. Well, during the campaign of 2024, Donald Trump called for a meeting while he was a candidate running for office with the tech industry and the fossil fuel industry, and asked them, as reported by Politico, an online news source, that he wanted the tech and the oil industry to donate $1 billion for his election campaign, and they could do whatever they wanted to do. Well, we know that goes against the amount of money that can be raised by private donors and contributed for election campaigns. But you do have different PACs in other ways in order for money to get into the coffers of our politicians running for office. Well, let's look at the payback and the payoff, ladies and gentlemen. As I indicated, on January 20th, 2025, the first day that Trump came to office, the first individual that was replaced was Mr. Willie Phillips at the head of the Federal Regulatory Commission. He was replaced on January 20th, 2025 by Mark Crispy. Now, since then, in 2024, there was a wholesale auction. After the decision came down to block the original 800% rate hike on natural gas, the fossil fuel companies came right back and filed a request for the wholesale auctions, which in 2023 for a megawatt day was $34.17 for a megawatt day, which was the wholesale cost spread across those 13 states in the District of Columbia, accounted for $2.2 billion that was passed on to ratepayers that we had to pay on our electricity bills. In 2024, it jumped from $34.17 to $262.92, which is a 686% rate hike, the highest in the history of annual wholesale market prices in the history of the PJM, which amounted to, over those 13 states in the District of Columbia, we went from paying $2.2 billion to $14.7 billion, which hit us June 1, 2025 on our electricity bills. The original settlement from the lawsuit that had been brought by Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania said that there should be a $325 cap. The auction that just took place this year, June 22nd, 2025, annual wholesale capacity auction for the PJM was $329 and some odd cents. It broke down to a 22% rate hike. This is unconscionable, ladies and gentlemen, on top of the 686% rate hike that we just got hit with last year. Now, you say, well, who does and why? You're going to find out real soon, ladies and gentlemen. 90% of this is being caused by prices go higher in July PJM capacity market auctions. This is an article that was recently published by the Advanced Energy Group, and they talk about this issue in this particular paragraph. Prices go higher in July PJM capacity markets auctions. Capacity prices soared to $329.17 for a megawatt day. For delivery years for 2026 and 2027, hitting the price cap approved by FERC after the price rose from tenfold in July of 2024. I just talked about the 886% rate hike from 2023 to 2024. The carrying price is the highest in PJM's history and an increase of $59.22, a 22% rate increase from last year. Record for the PJM auction. The result followed a trend of tightening supply and demand in recent auctions, which PJM agreed could lead to capacity shortfalls in 2029 and 2030 delivery. PJM Board Chair David Miles said the new load data centers gobbled up all new capacity in the auction. This auction also marked the first time ever that PJM has failed to secure enough generation to meet the target capacity reserve margins of 19.1%, securing 18.9 reserve generation in the auction. Well, it's being gobbled up by the tech industry. Let's drill down on this, ladies and gentlemen. Why is this? This is because the unholy alliance between the fossil fuel industry and the tech industry, because they are using gas turbines to power these plants. Let's take a look at what's going on in another region of the country known as MISO. Now, MISO covers the region of the country, which we will look at those states. MISO regions: Arkansas, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky, Louisiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Texas, Wisconsin, and the Canadian province of Manitoba. Now, REX Regulatory Corporation regulates energy for 16 states, central and southern regions of the United States. Let's look at an example of what is going on in the southern states as it relates to the southern region of the country. Now, the southern region of the country is going to be those states which are regulated through the Southeastern Reliability Corporation. It's responsible for ensuring reliable and so-called secure electricity grid across 16 and central states. Region lies within the Eastern Region's interconnection and includes Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, Missouri, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas, Illinois, Kentucky, Illinois, Oklahoma, Texas, Virginia, and Florida. Well, you begin to hear overlap if you heard me read the states that are coming under MISO, as well as under the PJM region. There seems to be overlapping regulatory authority. And all of them are supposed to come under FERC. Let's look at what's going on in these southern states, ladies and gentlemen. That's very, very, very important. When we look closely at Louisiana, and we're going to start there because of the Mike Johnson, who is head of the House, and in his districts, northeastern district of Louisiana, Meta is building the largest data center, Mark Zuckerberg, which will be built in the North American hemisphere. This data center will be able to fit 1,700 football fields. That means every team in the NFL can fit inside of this data center. This data center, which is projected to be able initially to use 2,662 megawatts of electricity, a day, in a 24-hour day, to power 1,334 homes. I won't be redundant, ladies and gentlemen. You can go to my news and events tab and you can click on the link and you will be able to find this article that speaks to this. Louisiana regulators approve infrastructure upgrades to handle data centers. Now, they're talking about having to build 3 gas turbine power plants to power this data center. Solar and wind was mentioned. It's an afterthought. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, for Black America, there's a recent article, which you'll be able to find under our news and events tab, that talks about a data center that was built 6 years ago in Southwest Memphis, Tennessee, which has the highest crime rates of any city in the country. Well, nobody's talking about the environment and impact of the air that people are breathing on how people are acting in that environment. It's called The Poisoning of Memphis. And it talks about the fact that when Elon Musk came into Memphis, he filed with the authorities there that they were going to use 15 gas turbines to power this data center through this plant. When someone finally went out and checked, they found they had 35 with no technology on top of the stacks for capture of the greenhouse gas emissions escaping in the air. It has had a devastating impact on air quality in Memphis, Tennessee. Asthma rates have gone up. Cancer rates have gone up. Property values have dropped. These are things that come in the noise factor, the lighting factor. All of these things come into play as we begin to look at where these data centers are being built. But when Biden and Harris came into office, they in fact targeted those same red states that those same GOP leaders voted against their constituents' interests for wind and solar and EV battery manufacturing plants being built to, in fact, bring down the cost of energy in those states. We're talking about my home state of South Carolina. Biden, in fact, bought over $12.2 billion, the highest investment ever in the state history of the state of South Carolina. Many of these projects have had to be stopped and put on hold because of the rescinding of the investment tax credits for manufacturing, for green technology and plants, whether it be for EV battery manufacturing or solar manufacturing of solar panels. And I had the ability, and we were blessed to have Mr. Keith Mathis with Naya Energy, who is the only African American known, not just in the US, worldwide, to own a solar manufacturing company called NASA Energy. he came on this platform and said that he was getting ready to through his financial backers, they were going to invest in northeastern Kentucky, his hometown, $800 million to build a solar manufacturing facility. The morning that they were going to have their press conference, he had the mayor there, the head of economic development for the city and the county. Someone leaked the information to the Aryan Nation and the Ku Klux Klan, and they decided they would have a major parade down Main Street of his hometown. He pulled the project out. They lost $800 million in investment because of something called racism and white supremacy. I'm not making this up, ladies and gentlemen. Now, if people want to know what's going on, the solar and wind industry has come under attack. There are a number of articles to substantiate what I am saying to you under my news and events tab. Also, this is playing out nationwide. If you go to our news and events tab, you'll be able to find out that here in the state of Maryland, Frederick County approves first of its kind site plans for data centers on Quantum's campus. This just took place this week, ladies and gentlemen. Matter of fact, the vote today is Wednesday. This took place on yesterday evening that they took the final commission vote on this. And this has been a pretty big political discussion about this data center being built in Frederick, Maryland. Now, this particular corporation spent over $100 million and bought land to build this data center with a long-range plan to do just that. And there's a YouTube video that you can watch called Controversial Data Center Developers Come to Frederick County. You'll be able to find that particularly, you can watch that. This particular article went on to say a contentious 4-3 vote in the Frederick County Planning Commission on Wednesday approved first state's plans with conditions for data center on roughly 2,200 acres Quantum Loophole campus near Adamstown. Commissioners grappled with the gravity of their decision as the site plan for a data center could be the first of many to come to Quantum Loophole expansive campus, because they're talking about this being built out and bringing more infrastructure to this campus, data center campus that they want to develop here in Frederick County. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, let's look at some other articles that you'll be able to find under our news and events tab, which will substantiate what we're talking about. You'll find the one, Louisiana regulators approve infrastructure upgrades to handle metadata center, forcing dirty power plants to stay open that could cost Americans billions. Well, that is one of the reasons why your electricity bill is going up. This particular article is done by Jeff John, and it was published on August 14th in Canterbury Media. Trump's administrative scheme to keep old fossil fuel plants running could settle utility customers with nearly $6 billion a year in unnecessary costs, the report says. This is why your electricity bill is going up. A new report finds that the Trump administration's push to keep dirty, aging fossil fuel power plants from closing down could end up costing U.S. utility consumers between $3 to $6 billion per year by the end of Trump's term, and that's a conservative estimate. Thursday's report from the consulting Grid Strategies was commissioned by Earth Justice and the Environmental Defense Fund, the National Resources Defense Council, and the Sierra Club. 4 environmental groups that have joined states in challenging the Department of Energy use of emergency powers to keep the J.H. Campbell coal plant in Michigan and the Eddystone oil gas burning plant in Pennsylvania running. This is what we're talking about. It's the fossil fuel industry's interest over everybody else with the tech industry. This is why your energy bills is going up. But more than that, this is why we have had the hottest summer on record to date, and that the storms, wildfires, have become more intense on the anniversary of Katrina 20th year. And it's not an anniversary celebration for Black folks. Close to 2,000 African Americans died in that natural catastrophe. And now you're talking about building the largest data center in North America, in Northeast Louisiana, and allowing those greenhouse gas emissions to escape in the atmosphere. Well, the next storm, Katrina, won't be able to come close to its power if this, which has just been approved and pushed by the governor of Louisiana, who's in the pockets of the fossil fuel industry, telling ratepayers, oh, your energy costs will only go up a couple of dollars. That's what we're working with, ladies and gentlemen. And we speak truth to power here on the platform of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. So let's look at the wholesale auction costs for MISO, because it's a little different than that of the PJM. But I know you wouldn't be shocked. Now, in 2023, the wholesale auction costs for the summer, because that is how the energy prices are regulated, because it's broken down because of the vast territory that MISO covers. So when we began to look at the annual capacity auctions for the MISO region, which I read was for the summer $10 in 2023 to $15 per megawatt day. For the fall, it was $2 for a megawatt day. Winter, it was $10 for a megawatt day. 9 zones, parts of Louisiana and Texas. Now, in 2024, it jumped for summer. It was $30 for a megawatt day. Fall, $15 for a megawatt day. Now let's compare prices. The summer of 2023, it was $10 to $15. Summer of 2024, it was $30 per megawatt day. That's the summer. Fall, it was $2 per megawatt day in 2023. 2024, it's $15 per megawatt day. Now, let's look at what happened after Trump comes to office in 2025. For summer, for a megawatt day, it jumped to $666.50, a 2,100% rate increase, ladies and gentlemen. It's 45 million people in those 15 states that make up MISO. This is what we're talking about. This is why your electricity bills are so high. When people jump up and down and holler about other issues, nothing gets more basic than your gas, water, and electricity bills. And let me tell you how this affects your electricity bill. It takes a tremendous amount of water used by these plants to cool the main frame for these gas turbines to cool them off. And that drives up your water bill. It also drives up the cost of natural gas, cost of energy, and it's all utilities. It doesn't get more basic than gas, water, and electricity. That hits everybody in their pockets. People are feeling helpless. In a recent survey for 2024, it indicated across 97 zip codes in the United States of America that in 2024, U.S. households spent $451 billion for electricity. That's the business. That's the big business of utilities. When we begin to look at the solar industry, me serving as the former head of the president of the National Association of Blacks in Solar, and now I serve as the head of the board of directors for that organization. We are a 501c3 organization. We are basically a legal entity based here in Washington, D.C. We, in fact, realized during Biden administration, there were over 13,000 solar installation and design firms. We had less than 100 African-American firms. Today, as we talk about the solar industry alone, it's projected to take a 30% hit, and firms are closing and filing chapters 11 left and right. So rooftop solar set to struggle on the GOP tax credit repeal. You will be able to find that article under our news and events tab, ladies and gentlemen. And as I indicated when I started this show, and we titled it, "Why is your energy bill going up?" And the attack on the solar and wind industry is because the fossil fuel industry cannot compete with solar and wind. And this is what the deal is. It's about market share. You'll also find an article called "The Market Not Policy is Now Writing the Future Chapters for the Fossil Fuel Era." It talks about the fact that even with these draconian moves by the guy I call COVID 45 plus 2 with 45 felony counts coming, 34 felony counts coming straight at you. You refer to him as Donald Trump. I refer him as the felon in the big house. We, in fact, are dealing with some serious issues, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, this show is brought to you every week by the Positive Change Purchasing Cooperative, LLC, which serves as an economic blueprint for renewable energy companies, both large and small, along with increasing market share for African and African American renewable energy companies to address the high energy costs at our historically Black colleges and universities, to utilize Black-owned farmlands and HBCU campuses to develop capacity and initiatives for renewable energy projects to bring down the underemployment of young African and African American men and women locally, nationally, and throughout the diaspora. Also to educate the African and African American community locally, nationally, and throughout the diaspora about the economic impacts of climate change and the need for environmental education through Black Talk radio programs such as Solar Now in the Future with its economic impact on Black America. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to tell someone about this podcast and this show, and get more people to come here and support what we are doing here. We are not the greedy, ladies and gentlemen, but we are certainly the needy. And until next week, as we always say, go in peace. And I'm your host, Ronald Bethay. Until next week, we say go in peace as we close another exciting edition of Solar Now and the Future with its economic impact on Black America. So until next week,